Good evening, everyone. I'm Mayor Rika Levin. We have with us a group of panelists that consists of my fellow trustees, the village manager, Engineer Paul Farrelly, consultants that work on what we call the DPW site, which is a housing initiative on our waterfront. This particular session tonight, which is March 9th, is called Lovingly School Me. And it is really about the effects of this initiative about the school system, our residents, and frankly, any other questions you have. We have split it up into a number of sessions in this public engagement forum so that people can attend each session separately in the area that interests them, or all of them sequentially, or they can look up the recordings. Feel free to ask questions beyond what this session is called, but we'd like to stay focused so that there is a focus to this conversation. I'm going to turn this over to Village Manager Karen Diatori, and we will bring on speakers as need be. She will go through with staff about a presentation to bring everybody up to date, and then we're going to open it up to questions and answers, which is really the purpose of this public engagement. So here we go. Karen Diatori.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this presentation over to Assistant Village Manager Maddie Zahaj, who will give you, along with some of our board members and colleagues here, an overview of the project, some background, as well as some information, preliminary information on the fiscal impacts of on the school district. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Good evening, Mayor, members of the board. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you again for joining us. We are going to start a little bit differently than we have on the prior presentations, since we know some folks are joining us for the first time and perhaps haven't been following along with the whole series. So we're going to start by reviewing the history of the site, as well as speaking a little bit about the origins of this proposed development, which was a request for qualifications released by the village back in 2019. So for those who aren't familiar with the site, this is a 3.4 acre group of parcels on the east side of the railroad tracks, bounded by Water Street, Main Street, Secor Road, and Central Avenue. The site is also traversed by the Sing Sing Kill, going from east to west. The site was originally a coal gas plant starting back in the 1800s, and is now a contaminated brownfield site. So as a result of that contamination, the site is now subject to a consent order by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC, which requires that Con Edison participate in at least some level of remediation on the site. And you can see a close-up of the site. This is Main Street coming down the hill here, and you can see this is the bulk of the site with the kill coming through. So we also have an aerial site view that we'd like to share, voiced over by village engineer Paul Fraioli. Currently, the site is being used as a DPW laydown yard. So Paul is going to take you through the site.
30 Water Street. This 3.4 acre parcel, consisting of 5 separate tax parcels in the village of Ossining, is the former home of the village's DPW facility. It is now primarily used as a transfer facility for organic waste, seen there at the right of the video, and other recyclable or materials used in DPW operations. It is bordered by Water Street on the western boundary, Central Avenue on the northern boundary, and Lower Main Street on the southern boundary of the parcel. Once completed, approximately 1.5 acres of green space will remain on the eastern portion of the property, connected to Water Street through a park being constructed along the Kilbrook Trail, extending up through the green portion of the parcel on the easternmost portions to connect pedestrians to the village's Riverwalk, southern connection off of Central Avenue. Access to Lower Main Street, as well as access to the village's Kilbrook Riverwalk, will be an asset this parcel offers in addition to the affordable and workforce housing component.
All right, thank you, Paul. So now that we have some of the information about the site's history, I'm going to hand it over to Trustee Lopez to speak about the original request for qualifications, or RFQ, that was released back in 2019.
Thank you, Maddie. So the request for qualifications was developed with a public input and created a clear set of goals aligned with the desires for the community, rather than an RFP process that would yield ideas of what a developer thought would work best. So I think that one thing that I would underscore here is usually in a project like this, you would hear RFP. That's a set of letters associated with projects like this, in which case we would be asking developers, what do you think should go here? But the village actually had a perspective about what this project should look like. And we wanted it to create affordable residential opportunities that would attract a variety of income levels to the village and all generations. We wanted to execute on a key policy strategy from the housing needs assessment in 2017, specifically to provide a deeper and broader level of affordability requirements for new housing development to ensure access to affordable housing by lower income households and that support mixed income housing. Now, this isn't exactly poetry. It's a very long sentence with a lot of words, but basically what it's saying is we wanted to create housing opportunities for folks that range, but particularly for those that were at a really affordable levels, because without getting into a lot of the details, the definition of affordable is still outside the reach for a lot of folks in our community. So we wanted to create options for them as well. So we also wanted to, in the request for qualifications, provide a public amenity that facilitated a pedestrian connection between Upper Main Street and Station Plaza. We wanted to create public access along the Sing Sing Kill and make a connection to the Sing Sing Kill Greenway, and you saw some of that in the video. So we have connections to both Main Street and to the Sing Sing Kill Greenway. We wanted to encourage additional development in the area. We just see so much potential in our waterfront and in that area of the waterfront in particular, that this could be an opportunity to really jumpstart development in what is traditionally an African-American community here in Ossining. We wanted to employ modern materials and sustainable practices. We wanted it to be pedestrian friendly and create space for commercial opportunities as well as community programming.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Lopez.
For sure.
So hearkening back to where we began our engagement series, we wanted to discuss why this is the site under consideration, as well as why it was determined that affordable housing would probably be the best use for the site. So let's start with why here. Why this site? So the site is in a key position to connect Main Street and so all of our downtown with our waterfront. But it also opens up some unique opportunities, such as access to the train station for transit-oriented development, as well as unlocking more than an acre of green space that's currently inaccessible, although it's public property, coupled with the opportunity to clear up a severely blighted site. And all of this is going to be transformative for the Station Plaza neighborhood. Further, the village-owned site comes up again and again in many of our community planning documents as an underutilized resource, and sort of cementing the idea that this collection of parcels will be key to revitalizing this section of our waterfront. So now that we have established why the site, why affordable housing? So a common question is why the village asked the developers who responded to the RFQ to propose a mixed-use, all affordable housing development. The site's distance from major highways, as well as the layout of the site, would make putting in big box retail, which some folks ask about, and light industrial use either difficult or impossible. So then the development really hinges on the brownfield development, or brownfield remediation rather. So estimated a cost of about $4.5 million. Using it as a park would not only cost the $4.5 million to do the full-scale remediation, but also probably an additional $500,000 or more to do landscaping to create the physical park. Further, once it was completed, it would remain village property and would not generate any taxes upon having invested all of that money. So we think about different ways that we would be able to do that remediation. Enrolling the development in the New York State Brownfield Cleanup Program, the DEC, is a viable solution. It achieves the village's goal of a catalytic use that includes site remediation, public improvements, a mixed-use building with neighborhood retail, community space, mixed income housing, and on-site parking. Then when we considered, well, what about market rate housing? Market rate housing would require a much greater degree of density to pay for that remediation and the desired public improvements. Not to mention the fact that the village has demonstrated time and again a significant need for more affordable housing. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. So now let's talk specifically about this proposed development. The current proposal includes 109 residential units as part of a mixed-use building with retail, amenities, and community space on the ground floor. All units will be affordable for a range of incomes between 30 and 80% of area median income, or AMI. The development also includes, as you've heard now, the extension of the Sing Sing Hill Greenway through the site down to Water Street, which is a pretty meaningful connection because now we have Water Street or waterfront connected to the community center. This is also considering a parking garage with potential for addition of parking for neighborhood use. So a few stories devoted to the building itself, and then perhaps an additional layer for municipal parking. Here is a site overview that shows the Greenway extension. You see here's the existing Greenway, and then this would be the extension coming down through the site, as well as the proximity to the Ossining train station, Metro North. So let's talk about affordability. Across the 109 units that are proposed, a range of affordability is being considered between 30% and 80% of AMI. So what is AMI? The area median income is determined on the federal level and is essentially the middle of the household income range in a region. So here you'll see the AMI for Westchester County, and you'll see it's split up by the size of household, going from between 1 and 6 persons in a household. And the idea is that the units in a development such as this one should be affordable to households at these various levels, with the standard for affordability being that households shouldn't have to pay more than 30% of their income towards housing expenses. The bottom of the chart gives an idea of what potential rents in the building might be at a variety of levels. The bottom, or the high rent would be for households at about 30% of 60% of AMI, while the low cost would be families at 50% of AMI or just below. Obviously, these are not rents that are set in stone, but just to give an idea of what AMI would look like in real dollars for folks who are renting. As far as the unit layout, the current iteration proposes 109 units as compared with 126, which was in the current proposal. But the units can certainly be flexible in bedroom counts and across income levels, subject to funding constraints, depending on what is required by those funding sources. So you see this first rendering here is a view from Water Street. So you see the building on the left-hand side here is what's being contemplated as the parking garage. And then over on the right-hand side, it would obviously be the housing units as well as the retail component along Water Street. And you may remember from the flyover video seeing the very high rock walls towards the back of the site. So you see how the site is sort of nestled into the rock. This is a view coming down Main Street. So if you're familiar, this is that little red house right at the top when Main and Secor split off. So you can see how the building just sort of nestles into the rock face there. And finally, as I mentioned prior, there is a demonstrated need for not only affordable, but for quality affordable housing in the village of Ossining. Going back to the 2017 Housing Needs Assessment, we see these figures. Of particular interest is the fact that over 59% of village of Ossining renters are cost burdened, which means they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. Of that 59%, an additional 33 are spending more than 50% of their income on rent. Building more affordable housing, particularly of new and quality construction, will secure affordable units in a waterfront neighborhood that is likely to see redevelopment in the coming years due to increased levels of interest in that neighborhood. So now we can talk about the commercial and community space. You'll hear about this a little bit more from one of my colleagues in just a few minutes. But the ground floor layout contemplates not only the amenities for the building, but also some ground floor retail space and a really exciting feature in the back here, which is about 4,000 square feet of community space, which may be used as a flexible space for distant learning for the Ossining School District. There are also major public amenities planned, including the aforementioned extension of the Greenway, increased access to the green space, which is at the back of the parcel, consideration of a public elevator or stairway in order to connect Main Street down with the Water Street neighborhood, and a parking structure for residents, which incorporates a layer for public parking as well. So when we discuss the added community benefit that this proposed development would bring into Ossining, you can see delineated here the cost for many of these major site improvements, including, as I mentioned, $4.5 million to remediate the brownfields condition, about $2.5 million to extend the Greenway, and a little over $1.5 million for municipal parking. Additionally, the development, as I mentioned earlier, is incorporating this roughly 4,000 square feet of community space that can be used as a learning space for students. All of this investment, were it in the absence of the developer's investment, would need to either come out of the pocket of us as taxpayers or would never materialize. And I think we can all agree that these are things that are going to be very important to our community and things that folks would like to see. On that note, I am going to introduce Maxwell Powell of Buyer Blender Bell, who is working with the Wilder Balter team to develop this concept. And Maxwell's going to go through the various site concepts in some greater detail. So welcome, Maxwell.
Great. Thank you, Maddie. Hi, everyone. I'm Maxwell Powell. I'm an architect, urban designer, and a partner in Buyer Blender Bell. For us as architects, our approach to design is to be site-specific and forward-thinking. We'd like to find opportunities within each site to design buildings that are authentic and builds upon its potential strengths. So here in Ossining, we were really immediately attracted to the potential of this site and the physical challenges that it poses. Basically what we saw in that video was, pretty striking to us. We thought that there was a lot of good opportunities here. So Maddie, if you can advance to the first slide. So this, again, I think we saw this previously, but I wanted to just kind of highlight a couple of things, right? First of all, from a planning perspective, the site really is a gateway or can be a gateway into the village from the waterfront and vice versa. So it was important to kind of turn this currently closed off site into something much more porous and open to the public. That the site could really be viewed as an extension of the village where people would be welcome to experience the canalway on the western end, as well as experience a natural forested area to the east and connect back to the existing greenway. We thought that was really important. And the other aspect that we thought was important was that the design of the open space in the building were not mutually exclusive, but in fact could actually reinforce each other and make them stronger as a spine. So this is the context that sort of drove our thinking in terms of how we thought about the site and how we massed the buildings and how it relates to the open space and topography. So let's go to the next slide. So in terms of the overall site plan. This is a roof plan. All of the development is located on the western end of the site where the existing DPW uses currently are. Staying away from the steep slope areas along Main Street, and also helping us preserve the natural landscape to the east. The goal was to keep as much existing open space as possible to maintain the natural quality of the site while improving the hardscape on the western end of the kill where the sort of canalway currently is. The building itself terraces up from Water Street, sort of up towards the east. We're planning for one or two of those setbacks to have a green roof. And the main roof, you can kind of see there in sort of these little rectangular boxes, will have solar panels installed on that main roof. On the other side of the kill is the garage that Maddie had mentioned, so that would contain all the parking required for the residents as well as for the public. Going to the next slide. So again, on the next slide, this is the ground floor plan, again, showing the two buildings, the garage on the northern side of the Sing Sing Kill and the residential building on the southern side. And the intent here was that the two buildings would flank the Sing Sing Kill and sort of reinforce sort of that visual connection back towards the eastern end of the site. One of the things that this allows us to do is to allow the residential building to have present a public frontage onto the kill, which we thought was really important as a way to activate that promenade, right? One of the things we didn't want is to have a promenade that didn't have any activity on it, right? That sort of doesn't do a whole lot for the open space. So we did that by sort of reinforcing that promenade by placing the ground floor uses quite strategically, right? So as you're coming off of Water Street, we have the retail positioned at that location that turns the corner up in towards the kill. The amenity and the lobby for the residential portion of the building fronts sort of the middle part of that building fronting the kill. And then we strategically place the community space towards the eastern end of the building. And that was intentional because we wanted to bring the most public use as far into the site as possible, sort of at the intersection of where the Sing Sing Kill Canalway ends and sort of the natural landscape begins towards the east. And also directly in front of the community space, we created a pedestrian bridge that connects you directly back to the parking garage on the other side. So that sort of creates sort of a nice circular walking network around the canal, which we thought would be a real benefit in front of the building. So what we'll do now is we're going to take a short walk and give a sense of the open space concept and the connection back to the Greenway extension with a series of sort of existing photos and sort of proposed views. And just keep in mind, these are early conceptual sketches, but hopefully conveys the improvements that we're planning for the open space. So let's start with the first view. So this is the existing view if you're standing on the corner of Water and Central Avenue. Looking back to the site, so the existing DPW building is on the left. The kill is actually right behind the metal fence back there, and you can see Main Street kind of in the background there. So we updated that view. If we go to the next slide, so we sort of updated that view looking back towards the building. So the garage is on the left. The newly built or sort of reinforced canalway is sort of in between the two buildings, and then the residential building is on the right with a very transparent ground floor with the retail fronting Water Street sort of turning up into the canal. If we walk a little bit closer now on Water Street, just before you enter the site, this is what it looks like today. The canalway is right behind the fence there. You can kind of see that low wall, that's that masonry low wall that's there. The DPW garage site is on the left, and then sort of the big yard is on the right. And the next slide kind of shows what this can start to look like, right? So the idea here is that we would rebuild the promenade, sort of the walking surface, and rebuild the walls for the canal, because that's sort of falling apart right now and that needs to be repaired. But the idea here is to really create an accessible access point from Water Street straight into the site, right? And what we did here was also pull back the facade of the retail on the ground floor to kind of open up that entryway as you enter into the site. So you kind of get a sense of what you could feel as a very inviting access and promenade around the canalway. Into the next slide. So the next slide kind of walks, if we were to walk further along the promenade eastward, sort of middle of the site, the canalway is just on the left there. You can kind of capture a glimpse there. And the next slide kind of shows what it might feel like if you're just sort of further along on that promenade. So directly on the right would be the entry into the residential building, which of course would be 24/7. So we have sort of active frontage on the canal at all times. If you look a little bit further, just beyond the lobby, there's sort of a glass corner. That would be the community space. That's right on the eastern end of the building. Directly across from that is the pedestrian bridge that goes over the kill and connecting back to the garage on the left side. And just sort of in the background there, you can kind of see between the trees, sort of that connection, that new connection and extension to the existing greenway. So if we go to the next slide. Now this is if you were standing just beyond the community space, now looking into the natural landscape of the eastern end of the site. You can see the Central Avenue archway, right, sort of supporting the Central Avenue right above it. That's where the connection to the existing greenway would come through. So this is the next slide, shows that potential connection, right? So you can see how that connection extends from the existing, or it ends on the other side of Central Avenue, connecting through under the arch and back onto the southern side of the canalway in this proposed image here. So, for us, I think we're really excited about this, obviously, and we really think that the greenway extension, the kill, and the proposed building configuration really forms a spine that ties the entire master plan together and reconnects the village to its waterfront at a pedestrian level, providing one of the project's most important and tangible community benefits. Thanks, Maddie.
Okay, thank you, Maxwell. I am going to wrap up with the added community benefit of talking about the anticipated pilot for payment in lieu of taxes. So currently, as we've discussed, the property is not on the tax rolls and doesn't generate any tax revenue. As an all affordable development, the revenue would be constrained by the rent roll. Even without a payment in lieu of taxes, the estimated annual tax bill for the development as proposed would necessarily be lower than a similarly constructed market rate development. The proposed pilot is still under review and will require ongoing negotiation between the developer and the village, but the final number is anticipated to be roughly 70% of what the developer would be paying if the property were fully taxed. So the pilot would represent about 70% of that total tax bill. The pilot would also include a built-in cost escalator to ensure that the annual payments to the village, the town, and the school increased with a rate similar to or higher the consumer price index, or CPI. So right now that's looking at about 2.5%. Regardless of the negotiated pilot amount, each taxing entity would receive the same proportion of the pilot payment that they would under a fully taxed development. So you can see, if you take a look here, let's say for the school district, for the average village taxpayer, the school district taxes comprise about 63% of their property tax bill. And so that means the school receives about 63% of that money. The same would be true of the pilot. So about 63% of the pilot revenue would also go to the school district. Over the interesting thing about this particular pilot is that because the property isn't currently on the tax roll, the pilot payment to the school district actually adds money to their annual budget, instead of in a typical situation where it would just redistribute the budget along a wider pool of taxpayers. This is actually adding that, again, roughly $144,000 a year to the school district's annual budget. The pilot is anticipated to last for about 30 years, aligning with the types of financing required for construction. The retail component of the building will not be subject, however, to the payment in lieu of taxes agreement. And then once the 30 years have gone by, the building will be added to the tax roll and treated like any other commercial property where it's assessed based on its income and expenses. And over the course of the 30-year pilot, the school district is anticipated to receive just under $6.4 million in annual payments, which is inclusive of the annual payment escalator. And finally, let's talk about the projected generation of school-age children. When communities contemplate new residential development, there are two industry standard multipliers that are used to project the number of school children. If you are familiar with the development world, you may be familiar with these names, PUMS, and then also Rutgers University. And the multipliers there's a range, and they're used based on not only the projected income levels of the residents who are expected to come and live in the building, but also on the mix of unit sizes or number of bedrooms. So looking at two different alternatives for this development, alternative one looks at the same number of 1 and 3 bedrooms with a majority falling on 2 bedrooms. Alternative number 2 still has a much higher weight on the 2 bedrooms, but many fewer 3 bedrooms. And so obviously more 1 bedroom units. When we apply the multipliers that I just spoke about to these two alternatives, we come up with how many school children at the very low end and the very high end might be projected to be generated by this development. Wilder-Balter also has an experience-based multiplier that they included here, which has to do with the developments that they have built in and around Westchester to sort of give a real-world practical multiplier to add into the mix. So for alternative one, which again had the biggest number of 2 bedrooms, but an even split between 1s and 3s, generated between 40 and 62 school-age children. Alternative number 2, which remember had many fewer 3 bedrooms, generated between 29 and 49 school-age children. So that is the end of our presentation. I just want to quickly go through the project timeline. Approval will require multiple steps, the first of which has already been completed, which is the selection of a preferred developer. Right now, the process that's ongoing is obviously community engagement, like the session that you joined this evening, as well as development of the LADA agreement, land acquisition and disposition. As you can see, there are a couple steps still to come after that, including the approval of the LADA, the CEQA process, review by the EAC, approval by the planning board, a permit by the board of trustees, and then implementation of the LADA. And after tonight, we have but one left in this particular engagement series. I'm sure you'll be hearing from us again. The next one is scheduled for Thursday, March 18th. If you lived here, you'd be home by now, which has to do with how one might apply if they wanted to come and live in this development. So we look forward to seeing you on the 18th. But until then, we want to hear from you. So if you have any questions, now would be the time. Additionally, if you are watching this on a recording or something occurs to you after the fact, please email the village trustees and the administration at this email address, plan, P-L-A-N, at villageofossining.org. If you have any questions that you think we might be able to answer, we also have a question and answer document on the Village of Ossining website, and you can also access that through ossiningdpwsite.com. And with that, I will turn it back to Village Manager Karen DeTore. Thank you.
Hi, so thank you for that. Maddie, great job explaining everything, and thank you, Maxwell and Omar as well. If you have questions, you are here. We have about 14 people in attendance. Please use the little raise your hand icon and let us know, and we will bring you over so that you can ask your questions. So Miguel Hernandez.
Miguel, I'll be bringing you over now if you just hang tight. And then unmute when you come over. Miguel, you're here.
The last time the mayor spoke about the possibility of a solar panels on the garage or on the building. I believe it was the garage building. And I think that's an excellent idea. I personally have been pushing for construction of those panels also at the train station, but we won't get into that now. So I'd like to at least make sure that that idea is put into the mix. I'd like to introduce another idea, this site historically was, before even the coal plant was there, also had a mill that produced, that was used for crushing grain and other products. I would like to discuss, not in any depth, but the inclusion in the site of a replica water wheel at this site. I do have some, I don't have it now, but I do have some drawings. It's a very inexpensive proposition, but we can have one there that would add some historical interest to this site, with some kind of explanation as to what the site was used for back in the 19th century. So that's all I have to contribute at this point. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Miguel. Bringing that history part, loving it. I see Karen Diatori smiling. I think it's, we're going to add it to the list. That's what the public engagement is for. It's a lovely idea. Differentiates villages from,
Okay.
cities, and adds historical context. Thanks for that contribution.
Okay, I'd like to at least submit a drawing or a photograph of what this water wheel would look like. If you know, can tell me how I can do that, I'd be happy to pass it on to you.
You can certainly email it to us. You can email it to my office, or if it's something that you have hard copy, we'll arrange to get it from you, Miguel. I believe Paul wanted to speak to you about some of the other parts of your question, and we can talk to you about some of the other green components of the building too.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Miguel.
Hi.
So I do remember your original presentation to another board way back when about the water wheel concept.
Yes.
I think it was maybe something that was being discussed in conjunction with the recreation center expansion when we did the natatorium addition.
Right.
But yeah, cool concept. And as you know, up near the Caputo Center parking lot there used to be the filing corporation that had the actual water wheel there. But going back to your other recommendation of finding, last time you were on one of these, you mentioned the grinding stones.
Right.
And we are gonna make a effort to get that one that sits outside the Caputo Center down the cliff there. We're gonna see if we can maybe bring that up somehow and kind of hand it off to Bill and his team to see how they can incorporate it into some type of position on their site plan there. So we'll see. That's to be determined. One comment on your solar components. Yes, I think that's a good idea. And speaking of the lot across the street and the rest of the lot, that was one of 3 areas that the village submitted about, I'm going to say about a year ago now, maybe a year and a half ago, to the to Westchester County, who's taking requested potential sites and making them part of a solar consortium. So we're still waiting to hear back on what sites are accepted and what are not. But I think out of the 3 that we sent down, that being two roof sheds and then an open structure, I think this would have the most collateral benefit in addition to the solar benefit. And it seems, I'm hoping that it's embraced by that county consortium as well. So that's something that's to be determined. As far as solar panels on top of the upper level of the structure to be constructed as part of this site, I don't think anybody wants to commit to that yet. I'm not even sure if it is going to get the southern exposure necessary with the building on south of the parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that we can certainly discuss when they develop their plans a little further along and we start talking about the building permit for both structures. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions? You can raise your hand and with the little raise your hand icon. Okay, Bob Schloss.
Mr. Schloss, I'm going to bring you over now. If you can unmute, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, this is Emily Sack. I'm married to Bob Schloss. It's his.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry about that.
How would you know? Anyway, so here's my question. Since this project is down by the river, maybe 1 foot above sea level, I don't know, maybe it's 2, but and we know that sea level rise is coming. How are you projecting for that, and how are you, what is your plan for dealing with that?
We are so glad that you asked this. We actually have a presentation that was done previously that you can find on our YouTube channel that really speaks specifically about the plans for this issue, but I think we can talk to you and give you a good indication of what we're doing right now. And probably, I think, Bill, that's probably best for you to take about the work that you're doing to make sure that this is a resilient building.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So when we started on this, which was a while ago, we had a design for the building that looked very similar to what you're seeing now. But then as we've moved along and looked at sea level rise and the projections and the new FEMA mapping, resulted in us basically changing our design to raise our improvements so that we really are dealing with the foreseeable sea level rise. So now the building is being built in a way where we're not thinking about it for the next 5 or 10 or 20 years, but for a much longer distance than that. There's a lot of green elements in the building, but ultimately I'd say it's going to be a LEED gold building. It's going to have a lot of features that are, I think, exciting to people, but first and foremost, it needs to not be inundated by sea level rise.
That's your question.
So here's my question. How would somebody in a wheelchair get into that space 35 years from now?
The community rooms.
The community rooms.
The entire site, as Maxwell went through, is at an elevation on completion that is not affected by 30 or 35 years of sea level rise. Just to correct one thing that you said, because it is very confusing. We think of like the Ginsburg site. That site was roughly 5 or 6 or 7 feet lower than this site is. Once you go over Water Street, the site is actually higher than the site on the other side of Water Street. And if you were to look at the elevation of the water in the Sing Sing Kill right now, it's much lower than the elevation that we're building our building at.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions? I do see that Miguel Hernandez has his hand up again. So want to bring over Miguel?
Do you want to bring over Miguel or he?
Oh, I see. Maybe that was just a residual hand up. I see Cheryl Nerhos, and I hope I pronounced that right. I apologize if I didn't. So.
Okay, Cheryl, I'll bring you over now. If you can unmute, that would be great. Thank you. Ms. Nerhos? Thank you.
Hello. Hi, this is Nico Nerhos. This is Cheryl's husband. How are you?
Not winning today.
I'm not going to say anybody's name anymore. There's no way of knowing who's really here. So
no, it seems like a very exciting project. We're excited for the development of this. Just had a couple of general questions. One regarding the retail space. I'm just wondering, are we going to be selective as to what goes in? Meaning, will we, as a town, bring in something that's a little bit more, say, high end than maybe the first person that comes around with a lease check for the landlord? Is my first question. The other question I have is Main Street. You had mentioned that red building that is on Main Street. That seems to be a little bit sort of dilapidated, and based on where it's located on the blueprints, is there any kind of risk for mudslides or anything like that based on where it is?
okay, so let's, I think we'll talk about your questions in sequence. So we'll talk about the ideas for retail first. We have the developer has some ideas on that. And Bill, why don't you talk about some of the some of our earlier conversations on making sure that we have a really nice fit of retail here that complements the building itself as well as our community.
Right. So I think the idea of the retail, and especially given its location where it fronts Water Street and then turns the corner into our site, the idea of the retail is to have retail that will bring people into the site. It's to really be what's called neighborhood commercial. It's I envision that we'll certainly would want to have a use that's active a lot of the time. Hopefully morning, lunch, and dinner time, so that it's an activated space. The tenants, I can imagine a food use being there. It's about, depending on the final amount of space, it's somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 feet. So it's not a huge user. It could be restaurant, it could be used like that. Our hope is to find someone local who is already operating a business in Ossining that sort of has a following and would want to be interested in this site. So yeah, I think it's really not an economic thing for us. It's the idea of it is to make it a better project.
Thank you, Bill. Paul, perhaps you can talk about the surrounding area and any risks associated with buildings above the site.
So I know the red building you're referring to. I know it's changed ownership in the last couple of years, and I believe it's in some concept ideas to develop itself, but they're not going to be done in a box. They'll be done relative to everything going on around it, just as any work that gets proposed by this project that might encroach on that parcel will be reviewed appropriately by either our consultants or in-house to see if there's any a potential dangerous condition that can be created by the construction, and we don't want to leave that when the construction is done for the residents and the occupants. So that's all something we'll review when they start taking these concepts now and bring them into construction documents on both ends, when that red building gets either refurbished and or replaced, and when this building, prior to this building getting a building permit.
If I can just add a thought here as well. It's hard to tell from the picture, but in other sessions, the question came about how far onto the cliff this development will actually reach. It doesn't actually touch the cliff. I understand the question because anytime you do construction, things move. So I get the question, but I just want to make sure people on this session also understand that the way this building is built, it will not actually touch that side cliff that you see, where you do see houses on top. And I think that's come up a number of times. Just to assure you of that. The retail space, the community space, these are proposals, they're drawings, they're renderings, they're all sorts of things. And for those of us who have seen other developers work, they sometimes look very much like the pictures you see at this point, and sometimes they don't look anything like what you see first. The important thing to remember here is that this is it's not a single developer doing all this. Yes, it's a developer that's managing it, but this is going to be watched by the state, by our village. It's not a private developer sort of going forward. There are going to be a lot of eyes on this. The retail space, the community space, has something that has come up actually out of some of these public sessions. I've gotten questions of how some of our local businesses can reach out. Who's really going to be managing it? Well, the management company for 99 years is actually going to be Mr. Walter and the group that is managing this, which is much longer than you usually get on these kind of developments. But people who are interested in retail stores, this would be not a bad time to start bringing that forward and ask the questions if you're interested in opening a business down the road. whether you currently have one in our village or you want to expand. But the management company will not be the village. The village is actually turning this property over to what the board last year felt unanimously and this year feels unanimously is a better use of the property than as it currently exists. And so that I just wanted to sort of put a little framing around that, and also do a little shout out for people who want to open businesses and want to look at that space, that, you know, it's never too early to start those conversations with Mr. Balter, or let the village manager know, so that you get a closer look of what's available for the future. Thanks.
Okay. We have another person. We have Mary Ann Cerise, or somebody using Mary Ann Cerise's name. So.
Okay, Marianne, I will bring you over and we'll see if it's you. Marianne, you can unmute.
It is me.
When?
I actually matched with my email address. First off, I just want to say it's really exciting to see this presentation. I've been able to participate in the first one that was on site, and also to see the ones, the recordings, and then the other Zoom calls. I've participated over the last few years in a number of community-based kind of dreaming sessions, and I can see in this proposal, you know, efforts to try to address those dreams from the community. So I'm glad to see them. My question, it was very helpful to see the data that was presented about projections of student enrollment growth. And I'm wondering if the board could just share, has there been any feedback from the school district or the school administration in light of that data that would help to inform the community?
I will direct that to the school administration who is present on this call. Dr. Sanchez, perhaps you'd like to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everybody. We've been in communication with Karen and the team and trying to assess what the potential impact is going to be for the schools. I mean, I think the more direct answer to your question is yes, we've been in communication, and at the same time, eventually we'll work with our demographer to see what the long-term impact will be for overall enrollment for the schools when the project is solidified and the final plans are set.
Thank you. Marianne, do you have any other questions?
It's not a question, but again, just an affirmation to see the numbers of affordable housing units that are being proposed and really being affordable units that are at a you know, a broad range of income levels is, you know, as a village resident and a homeowner, I'm very excited to see those as well. I guess one other additional question, I think I know what the answer is, but it's good to hear it from the board and staff is, you know, what can you explain a little bit of the process that, you know, if this proposal goes forward, what the process is for, you know, a lottery system or leasing up the facility? I recognize that it would not be allowed to be restricted exclusively to Ossining, but could you speak to that process a little bit more?
Sure. It would not be, because of the nature of the project and for a variety of reasons, including fair housing law, it would not be restricted, however, other than by income, but it would be subject to a lottery. It would be subject to a lottery, and we would be complying with the marketing requirements that are attached to this, the subsidies that are supporting this project, but we would also be promoting this amongst our residents, as well as employees of the school district and other organizations who are maybe challenged in our county to find an affordable place to live. I'm going to defer to Mr. Balter too, because he has run, he has actually built several of these projects and they are now successfully leased up. So I think he can talk a little bit as well to add some more detail.
Yeah, I think you did a good job. There's a requirement for an affirmative marketing plan that basically says we advertise far and wide. But in our experience, having built about 3,000 of these apartments in the New York metro area, people generally want to live close to where they have a connection. So while the people can come from anywhere and live here if they meet the income requirements, you'll end up with a lot of people who either already live in Ossining, lived in Ossining, have kids who live in Ossining, parents who live in Ossining. They may work in the school district, they may work somewhere else, maybe they're in Croton, but you're going to get a lot of people. And I think the best evidence of that, I can tell you, we looked at one, we actually looked this week at one of our developments in the town of Cortland, in Montrose actually, which is a 92-unit development. And there we have actually 10 people whose last address before living there was Ossining. So that's an example of where in a different town, and people a couple of towns away, probably wanted to stay in Ossining, but there wasn't something there for them at the time. So they live in this development. So I think there's a combination of, you're going to get a lot of local people who live here. And I think that by building these developments around Westchester, you end up meeting the broader need for Ossining residents and other residents.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I see a name, Marissa Caruso, is hands up.
Marissa, I'm going to bring you over now. Marissa, if you can unmute, that'd be great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good evening, and thanks again for these presentations. I find them very helpful. I tuned in a little late, and my question, I saw that there were two alternatives that were presented, and they had a different generation of school children in each one. And I guess I just wanted an understanding of what the benefit of one over the other than the obvious, because of when you consider Ossining schools, it would be better to have, I think, a development that generates less school children. But are there benefits to the first alternative? And if you could just speak to clarifying the difference between the two and what the considerations are.
Sure. We know the needs in the community, and we know because we have an Ossining housing voucher program. There are 3-bedroom units in the village of Ossining are virtually non-existent. So there is a need. So again, there is a need, a demonstrated need for affordable 3 bedrooms. When you get to a 3-bedroom unit, you're often talking about a pretty high rent that sometimes rivals a mortgage of a fairly well-priced home. However, there's also a need for, so we have a need for family housing. We also have a documented need for senior housing. And so there's really probably a justification for either housing mix. And we have talked to New York State Homes and Community Renewal about this. There would need to be a market analysis done to really document the need. But we know here in Ossining that we can well support the smaller unit mix, with less 3 bedrooms, and potentially the larger one as well. The reason that we have those two is we are very sensitive to the school district and the fact that a project like this tends to yield a higher number of school children than a market rate building. So those would also be factoring in. And again, I'm going to refer to the developer to talk about how those requirements play in when we're looking at the state for subsidies, and how really it's been demonstrated need is a big driver.
Sure. So I think what's important to understand is that we responded to the village's RFQ that sort of set forth a bunch of parameters. We wanted to have something when we responded, which was more than a year ago, that we strongly believe the state and county would fund. Since that time, because of the sensitivity to the schools, and what we proposed first was the alternative 1 with more 3 bedrooms. When in response to the projected school-age children conversation, we got in touch with the state. The village and us had a call with the state to see if they would entertain us reducing the number of 3 bedrooms. And as Karen said, they basically said, do a market study, demonstrate to us that there's a need for more 1s and less 3s. Or if you do that many 1s, make sure you can demonstrate a need. In Ossining, we won't have any problem demonstrating that need. And we're in the process right now of doing the market study that the state requested. So ultimately, we'll show it to the state, get them to bless that concept. And if that's what the village wants, and the school district wants, that would be the direction that we would head in. I mean, there obviously are advantages to 3 bedrooms because of need, but that has to be offset against the potential for more kids. So I think we're agnostic on it, but I think we need to make sure that what we propose will be funded by Westchester County and New York State. So I think we're on our way to getting there.
I just like to add, I think you, Merced, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, to put it plainly, it's about the schools. I mean, there are two growing populations, and not just in Ossining, but in Westchester County. And the data shows this over and over. One is immigration, the growth of immigrants and need for housing. But the second one is seniors aging in place. And I think after this pandemic, we're going to realize the importance of people of a certain age who are aging in place, needing housing near their families. That became apparent during the pandemic, even more so than what we thought before. So I think in the latter, so you're balancing on one hand, it's all about the schools and the number of children. We have housing issues. We also have overcrowding issues in Ossining. Not all communities have overcrowding issues. So I think this is where the developer, the staff listened carefully to public engagement meetings like this, looked at the studies, and we're not going to solve all the problems, but I think for some of the seniors, and I think that will actually get you more people from Ossining and some of the local communities, and would solve some of those issues. The model that has fewer 3 bedrooms, greater 1 and 2 bedrooms, is, in my opinion anyway, the way to go. And I appreciate that the developer went through the steps that they need to, because this is a big part of this is public financing. But it's number 1, the schools, and number 2, the seniors, to put it plainly. And thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. I do agree. I think that, I like this project. I think there's a need, but I also think making the critical needs of Ossining a priority while we're considering this is definitely something that we need to do. So I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caruso. Do we have anybody else? Feel free to ask a question. We're happy to answer questions. I see Mr. Hernandez's hand is up. So Jamie, can you bring him over?
Absolutely. Miguel, you are over here now. If you can unmute, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. What is the plan going forward? When is this project going to the planning board and all of the other village boards that would be involved in this? In other words, generally speaking, what is the projected timeline for this project?
Okay, I'm going to ask Stuart to answer that probably in better detail than I can. Our planner has a ZBA meeting tonight, but Stuart, maybe you can take them, give an idea. We have a lot of steps to go before we get to that point, but I don't want to misspeak.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Miguel, good evening. We're not on any planning board agenda at this point, so it's not there. It has not been put on the agenda yet. I'm not able to really give you a specific ideas to when that's going to happen. It will obviously the board that it goes before, someone will declare themselves as lead agency, and then we get obviously into what the nature of whatever the SEQRA review is going to be. That's the State Environmental Quality Review Act, for those people not familiar with the acronym. But it's not there yet. There will be the need for a waterfront special permit to be issued by the Board of Trustees in accord with the zoning code. There will be obviously the planning board's role as well. But I'm unable at this point to sort of tell you, when that's going to happen, when it's going to show up on their, agenda. At this point, we're not there. We're still, discussing, and we'll be discussing the land acquisition and disposition agreement. Obviously, as you may have heard from the earlier discussions, we have letters out to the DEC with regard to the proposed alternatives that have been presented by Consolidated Edison in order to, in our hope to get this property into the brownfield program. But I'm unable to tell you now when that's going to show up on a planning board agenda, but it certainly will be, well advertised before that happens.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Miguel still has
Do you
his
have
hands
another
up.
question?
No, I'm lowering my hand.
Oh, okay.
I lowered it for you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Feel free. Okay, so I'm not seeing anybody else raise their hand. I'll just give you another couple seconds in case you're trying to find the little hand button. But if there are no more questions, we want to thank you for your time this evening. Thank you to everybody here, to Buyer Blinder Bell, for the presentation, and also obviously Wilder Bolter, but the board and Dr. Sanchez, we appreciate you being here, our staff. This is now, again, our 5th meeting. We're going to have our 6th meeting in a couple of weeks, and we will keep you posted on that. Please feel free to watch the video and share it. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are very reachable. The information is in the presentation, which will be on YouTube. And you can always reach me at kdettori@villageofossining.com. So thank you very much. Have a lovely evening, everybody.
For those of you who are going to be on the advice of council, that's the BOT members, that's going to start at 8:30 for the advice of council. Thank you, folks.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Okay, bye-bye.